Hi there, welcome again. Today we're doing another antique map video, big surprise. This time, John Talon's 1849-1851 map of Africa. So today's map we're taking a look at is a absolutely beautiful illustrated and colored map of Africa from John Tallis and Company's post 1849 illustrated atlas. So this atlas is really important because it's one of the last sort of old school illustrated atlases before we get into the modern style that's a lot more like something you would see in National Geographic. The interior of Africa has often been a place where external cartographers have put on imaginary expectations of what they might see. And it's a place you see a lot of cartographic myths that show up again and again. And this one is not disappointing. However, this being published in between 1849 and 1870, perhaps, the date I have is 1851, but I can't quite be sure. There are some of these details are in there, but some of them are not. So, for example, Mount Kilimanjaro is right here. And that's certainly close to where it is now. However, just to the north, we have the Mountains of the Moon at the south edge of the Sahara Desert, which we now know certainly does not exist. That is a often featured legendary mountain chain in Central Africa that is now sometimes applied to the Rwenzori Mountains, which kind of move along here in real life, but definitely don't exist. In West Africa, we've got the same thing. Up here along the coast inland, we've got the Kong Mountains, which are now known to not exist. However, we also have Congo and the start of the Congo River, which has bequeathed the name Congo to large areas of Central Africa today, including two countries with that name, and was originally derived from the name of a tribe that lived in this sort of coastal region here quite a long time ago. So this time period is kind of a confusing one. We're after the end of the African slave trade. Slavery is still legal in the United States and in many colonies in the Americas, but the actual importing and exporting of slaves is now mostly illegal and looked down upon throughout the British Empire and by other empires, even if, you know, they profited from it in the first place and have allowed it to, you know, exist in a lot of these places. But, you know, the scramble for Africa has not yet occurred. There is limited European colonialism. It exists certainly along the coast, but a lot of the inland hasn't been touched in the same way.
Part of the reason we date this map to 1851 is because the major European exploration of the interior of Africa occurred between about 1840 and 1870, and we know that this line of atlases was produced in 1849. David Livingstone, in particular, was important in the timeline of this map because he explored this area of East and Southern Africa that gets mapped here. Stanley also is a major figure in British exploration in this time. In his searches for Livingstone, he mapped Central and East Africa a little bit later, but also adding to the map. And that really changed how much information the British and British map makers would have had about what was going on there. They would have had things that we don't see on this map here, such as the Congo River and Lake Victoria, eliminating the Mountains of the Moon, things like that. And these explorers really changed how Europeans were mapping this area at that time.
As said, the other thing in this map that tells us a lot about how Europeans were perceiving Africa at this time is the illustration. So again, in terms of the cartographer, this is from John Tallis and Company, illustrated by J. Merchant, engraved by J.H. Carnett, with the map work done by J. Rapkin. So this team created this entire atlas, and these atlases were very much for general consumption. They were something someone might want to own to show that they're intelligent or understanding where things are. And because of that, what we're seeing here are sort of ethnic groups and things like that that might have been in the news or in vogue then. So we see examples of Arabs of Algeria and Bedouins of Arabia up here in the north, which is sort of what Europeans are associating with North Africa at that time. Because again, the colonialism is only just getting going in this area in some ways. So they're sort of thinking of these as a lot more this traditional nomad tradition that they think of this. There's no ethnic groups reference for Central Africa. The group we have drawn next to it is the Hottentots or Bushmen, which live down here in the Kalahari. We also have another example of Hottentots in the other corner. And both of these two examples here are kind of idealized images of indigenous peoples of the deserts that are right at the edge of the European British colonial project in South Africa. So this is sort of what they're thinking about as like the exotic peoples that live nearby. Lastly, we've got this absolutely lovely picture of St. Helena with its cliffs, which is an island out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Pretty unimportant today, but at the time it was a major British whaling and refueling stop. So it was quite important to the British colonial expeditions going down there to South Africa. So it was often featured on maps and highlighted. This map matters because it's reflecting an era of African history between the first stage of colonialism, which was very much about the slave trade, extracting people from West Africa, and the second stage, which is the scramble of Africa, when the African continent was carved up between different European powers who blocked off different areas. And at this stage, the only part of it that's really been carved up and demarcated on this map are the coast along the Mediterranean at the north, which is sort of thought of in the same way that Europeans think about a lot the Middle East in many ways, rather than the more untouched landscape of Africa. And down here in the bottom in South Africa, where the colonial project is reflecting something a lot more similar to what you might see in Australia or the United States. And we can see country borders being drawn in the same way that they would be there.